In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, here goes. Amen. This is Pints with Jack, Season 8, Episode 1. Welcome to Season 8. Welcome, friends, to Pints with Jack, your favourite C.S. Lewis podcast run by three Volcandrians, Andrew, Matt, and myself, David. This season, we're once again following the adventures of Elwyn Ransom, who this time is exploring Perelandra. And today is our season kickoff. Gentlemen, are you ready for Season 8?
I am so ready for Season 8. This is one of my very favorite books, but I'm going to rename Perelandra and call it by its proper title, Unget.
Ooh, this reminds me.
Oh boy, here we go.
Andrew, we need to do more or less a happy hour with you, myself, and Mary Margaret, potentially Kristen, because she read Till We Have Faces.
Yeah.
And she just wasn't
She's
drawn
the
into
one.
it.
Lock her down.
She was like, I don't really know what it was about. I don't really get it.
No. It's a repulsive book. I remember doing some work with Max McLean on it one summer, and he said, I really don't like Orwell. She's not likable.
Or very relatable. Like, it's just so extreme.
No, I think she's eminently relatable because we are her. She is us.
I think that was the intention.
But she is the worst parts of us. Yeah.
But like, she kind of pointed that out too. Like, this seems pretty extreme. Was kind of our dialogue around it. It just was so hard to. We all have those flaws, but it seemed like they were hyper accentuated, almost like those like dramatic plays that overly dramatize both extremes. It kind of that was what we had a walk about this on a Sunday. I didn't even know she read it until after she finished. So we'll be very curious to talk with you about it.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to set up some time for that. But yeah, I mean, I think that Lewis wrote a repulsive book. He wrote something that kind of turns people off. And so
It's a good way to describe it.
But what he's trying to do is have people grow in their distaste for their own selfishness. So it's a redemptive distaste if you do it right.
You know, it would be interesting if you read it in that lens, or if it's more explicitly spelled out. I think of that Fulfillment of All Desire, where was it St. Catherine of Siena that was given a vision of like what we look like if we become the fullest of like a hellish creature, and like was actually brought to that vision, and it was placed on, and it was just disgusting and diabolical to see. Like if you read it through that lens of like, these are the worst parts of ourselves if they become extreme. You know, maybe some individuals are really to that extreme already, but even if maybe you're someone that's maybe not quite to that extreme, it's like that's the capacity of what we can fall to when our loves become so distorted in our ability to go into. Like maybe if you take it from that perspective, I can see exactly what you mean. Yeah.
And we're off the schedule, and the whole season now has to be readjusted.
Well, it's the fact that we start a new season, new book, and we spent 3 minutes talking about Till We Have Faces.
Well, start as you mean to finish.
As the resident host, so let me just give you a little opportunity here real quick to expand on why you think it's the proper title is Unget.
Well, Unget is Aphrodite or Venus, and Perelandra is Venus. And so there's a kind of arc that Lewis is doing about Venus. And it begins here. It carries on through the Chronicles of Narnia. It carries on in That Hideous Strength, and then carries on in the Chronicles of Narnia and Magician's Nephew. And Magician's Nephew, whose planet is Venus, is the last book, the last novel that Lewis writes before he writes Till We Have Faces, as he is falling under the sphere of Venus and falling in love with Joy Davidman. So there you go.
Beautiful. I like that. David, what are your thoughts here as we enter Season 8?
I'm really looking forward to this. We'll talk a little bit about our personal histories with this book a little later, but I am looking forward to going through this in a little bit more detail than I did the first time. And I'm also looking forward to integrating a little bit of Perelandra the opera into our episodes.
Yeah.
So listeners can get little samples of what happens in the opera version as we read through chapter by chapter.
Even just reading through the first chapter carefully and slowly. And because I know it so well, it's easy to skip over till I get to my favorite bits, but I slowed myself down. And gosh, it's just, Lewis is such good quality. Reading him carefully, reading every word, there's revelation every time.
And I think particularly this book, because I think this is certainly some of his most elevated prose he ever writes.
I would agree with that. We're going to talk about this later, so I'll keep this really short. We're going to have a section on our experience with it, but I just remember having such an experience of the beauty in the immersion. I mean, it was probably the best I've experienced of Lewis. And so I am looking forward to that again, just almost the enjoyment of the book for the book's sake, which is unique for me because I only like a book because of truth.
Matt, that makes me very proud.
Our young one is growing.
I know. Well, we can't dwell in this place. It feels very foreign to me. So let's move on to the drinks of the week, gentlemen. What are you guys drinking?
Well, I'm kicking things off since this is a season start with a little bit of VAT 69.
Oh.
And because it's Perelandra, I'm drinking some tea, but it's green tea for reasons that will become clear if you haven't read the book.
Ah, that's lovely.
Oh, man, David.
By the way, you know why it's green?
Why is it green?
Because Venus's metal is copper, and copper turns green.
When it oxidizes.
Yes. I am drinking in my London Starbucks mug my favorite H-E-B San Antonio blend of coffee.
Did that arrive from Aldo?
It still did not.
All right. Okay. I'll check in with him.
Well, Andrew, you'll be proud. Mary Margaret brought me back some H-E-B, and I have tried it, and it is delicious.
The San Antonio blend?
That's another great question. I don't know.
Okay. Great. Well, the bells are chiming, hastening us onward.
That's all we have time for today. We'd like to thank all of our patron supporters.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a driveway chime here. Hopefully, it doesn't go off while I'm talking too much.
No worries.
Well, I'm drinking coffee as well, and today we're going to be toasting Patreon supporter Rebecca Walton. And so, Rebecca, we raise a glass as we enter into this new season, a new beginning, and really one where we're going to be diving into an unfallen world. So there's a newness to the creation that we're going to be experiencing as well. We just pray that you would just find such an inspiration from the journey that we're about to go on, and that it would just guide you in your own spiritual journey towards perfection. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. So in the preface of Perelandra, Lewis writes this. This story can be read by itself, but it is also a sequel to Out of the Silent Planet, in which some account was given of Ransom's adventures in Mars, or as the inhabitants call it, Melicandra. All the human characters in this book are purely fictitious, and none of them is allegorical. CSL. Since we're at the beginning of the season, and we have done Out of the Silent Planet, it was now 2 seasons ago, if you can countenance it. So normally at the beginning of each episode, I'm going to be giving one of my 100-word summaries for the chapter under discussion. But I thought what we could do today is recap the events of the previous book. As we heard in the preface, Lewis says you can actually read this book without having read Out of the Silent Planet, but I think it probably helps. So what I thought the 3 of us could do is we could swarm this thing and summarize what took place in Out of the Silent Planet. Matt, would you like to kick us off?
At a high level, first, well, we can circle back to the high level. So we'll just start with right from the beginning. So it starts with this character Ransom that's on a stroll and ends up in this house and sees that there's some sort of struggle going on, and eventually gets taken himself, really against his will. As we find later in the book, there was more of a cosmic plan going on here, but from his perspective, and just transported to this very foreign place called Melicandra. And so what's really unique here is this is obviously an incredibly foreign experience. So really that journey, if I had to remember what to characterize that beginning stages, he's traveling in this like spaceship type thing. He's trying to orient himself. He's feeling a density, a heat, a light that's coming in, just really a denseness almost to reality as he's being transported. And obviously it's a very foreign thing. And so there's just a lot happening as he eventually lands on this planet where he is again trying to figure out what's supposed to be going on. Where am I? What is this? But at the same time, there's like this, I keep using this word, density of reality that's just kind of pouring into him, which will play a role later. But that's kind of some of the very beginning stages.
Okay, so Andrew, what happens when he arrives at this planet, Melicandra?
He arrives and it's kind of a sensory overload. He's not sure what to make of it. The gravity's different. He's also armed himself with a knife, and he has determined to get away from his captors. He's in great fear of being sacrificed to the natives, and fear really dominates him, but he struggles with his vision. And that's a key concept in Lewis all over the place, but also Ransom seeing things correctly is really crucial. He makes his way into the Malacandrian wilderness. He comes across a Malacandrian native and soon understands that there is sensible language, intelligible language. And as a philologist, as a student of language, he soon begins to learn Malacandrian and begins to talk with what becomes his greatest friend for the year or so that he spends on Malacandra.
And then after that, he goes hunting with them to hunt this beast called the Hanakra, this great water beast. And they do kill it and celebrate. But then the two people who kidnapped Ransom and brought him to Malacandra, they turn up, kill one of these creatures, a Hross, and Ransom is sent to go and meet this mysterious figure. The story comes to a head as he meets effectively the Archangel, this supernatural being who rules the planet. Matt, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, well, he also learns as he meets this Archangel type creature that almost like it's like a retroactive where he realizes what was really going on. He realizes, he thought he was going to be a sacrifice, and that wasn't really his fault. He was kind of planted that seed because of Divine and Weston. And it was more their misunderstanding. So the knowledge that he was receiving was very, very partial and limited. But he gets there and he just realizes so much what this journey was, what his role was, this creature, and just gains a better understanding of them and then the role of Divine and Weston. And wasn't there, if I recall, almost like a sort of self-sacrificial willingness of him at the end of the book where he was willing to, because he recognized that this wasn't good for them to ever, Divine and Weston, to be here, to come back. Like, fill in the gaps there, but I feel like I remember self-sacrificial. But he didn't end up executing on it, but there was a willingness.
Yeah, he said basically, if you need to get rid of all of the humans, I get it. Go ahead and do it, even if that means I die.
And all of this, and what we'll discuss this season, reflects one of the key motivations behind this. Certainly, Lewis loved science fiction, or what he called scientifiction. He had these pulpy American magazines, and he read all the science fiction that he could get his hands on. H.G. Wells, of course, was huge for him. But part of what he was interested is in the spiritual ramifications of space travel. And as we mentioned last season, David Lindsley had a book called Voyage to Arcturus, and broached some similar themes. What will happen spiritually? So one of the crucial moments in Out of the Silent Planet is when Ransom feels like he should probably tell Hyoy, his Martian friend, about Jesus, about Christ. And before he can do it, Hyoy begins to catechize or teach Ransom that our planet was where Malaldil, blessed be he, became a sentient being. And so the spiritual story of Jesus, of God the Son, incarnating and dying for the whole world is known throughout the universe and throughout the galaxy, and certainly already known well on Mars. And so that's some of the stuff that Lewis is getting at. And so in Venus, in our book this season, he'll continue on a similar theme of what are the spiritual implications and responsibilities for a human from a fallen world if they should travel to another world.
So picking up the story where we left it, Ransom is at this island. He's speaking to this Archangel. Ransom, Weston, and Divine are also brought there. And Ransom does some work as an interpreter, since as a philologist, he's much more fluent in the language. And he translates for Weston, who is the chief antagonist. And Weston uses very grandiose language to describe his worldview and mission. And Ransom has to translate it into its bare terms, and you get to see the ugliness and the stupidity of such an ideology. And this is where it becomes clear that they need to leave Malacandra. And so this Archangel being then sends them back to Earth to purge them from Malacandra and tells them that they cannot return under pain of death. But he implies that there is going to be a continued war going on Earth. How does this story then wrap up when they get back to Earth? Aside from having a pint, of course.
Oh, I thought that was the most important part. It wraps up with a conversation between Ransom and the fictional Lewis. about Lewis writing it up as a way of maybe doing some positive propaganda and warning people about some of the spiritual implications as to what's going on. If you didn't know, Out of the Silent Planet is published in 1938, and so the rumblings of war, a Second World War, have already begun. Hitler has come to power. People are beginning to be very afraid. And so Lewis is also looking at and wondering about what spiritual powers, demonic and angelic, might be at play in such a war. And so he kind of sets the stage for that and introduces himself as kind of a frame character for that.
And speaking of setting the stage, let's now talk about the historical context of this book. And when I wrote up the outline, I originally had it as Andrew leading on this one, but I see Matt has notes here, so over to you, Matt.
Don't worry, listeners, I'll correct him.
I figured let's let the peasant try first, and then we'll have the resident scholar fill in the gaps. So, interestingly enough, I actually found the historical context to be incredibly helpful when I was diving into this, and it feels like it played a critical role in just the themes that we're going to eventually talk about, which we'll even talk about some of those in today's episode. But it was published in 1943. Interesting, some of the books around this were the Screwtape Letters, 1942, Problem of Pain, 1940, A Preface to Paradise Lost, 1942. So it's like you have all of these books right around it. And I don't think, first and foremost, Andrew mentioned, it doesn't, I think we all realize that published in 1943 means World War II was going on. And so there's the whole battle, good and evil, the spiritual battle, the actual battle, the high stakes for the entire world on the way that this goes is all in the background. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't seem coincidental that you have the Screwtape Letters coming out of this. You have the Problem of Pain. You got A Preface to Paradise Lost, all at the exact same time period that you have this book, which is also about the high stakesness of temptation, evil, the fall. And so I thought that was really interesting that I wasn't expecting to have all those books that are similar themed to some degree, all written at the same time period. And so the historical context seems to play a pretty big role in this. And I guess the one final thing I'll say is like Paradise Lost has a lot of overlapping themes: temptation, free will, cosmic struggle. The unmanned seems to resemble Milton's Satan. Both characters use rhetoric and deception. There's huge consequences to disobedience and obedience, as we see. So feels like there's a lot going on. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to first to give me a grade for how well I did on this, and second to fill in the gaps.
Fairly well done, I would say.
ChatGPT says thank you.
Oh, wow. I'm sorry. Our blonde boy knows how to read, David. Isn't it touching?
I think what's more impressive here is the intelligence of it.
Well, no, I think it missed a huge key theme, as did you.
Oh, now he says this biasly after the first statement, knowing it.
Well, I was just trying to make you feel better.
I'm ready for this key theme.
One of the things that you really have to look at is the nexus of my little title for this section is Pictures, Paradise Lost, and Penelope. Lewis said all of his fiction, and he writes this before he writes his best book, Till We Have Faces, that all of his fiction begins with a picture. And so he says, when I saw a fawn walking through a forest, I thought that had to be a fairy tale. So he gets a picture and then decides a genre. The picture he has in his head at the beginning of writing Perelandra is that of floating islands, which we'll get to in short order. But he said, well, that can't be on Earth, so that must be a space travel book. So all of this kind of begins with a picture, and he begins writing it up. There's also Preface to Paradise Lost, the Screwtape Letters, Mere Christianity, in all three of those books written at the same time, within a year or so. He is thinking consciously about evil and about the devil. And so you're right to have read that paragraph. But the devil and struggling with the devil and the implications of that, really takes center stage. He also dedicates it to Sister Penelope, and he writes to, this is an Anglican nun with whom he was friendly and for whom he wrote an introduction to her edition of the Athanasian Creed. And so he writes to her and to Arthur Greaves about the progress of the book. He finishes it in about May of 1942, finds that at the end he has to go rewrite the first couple of chapters. And so you've got some of that stuff going on. Also, although there's not a lot of talk about it, it's written within the context of the Inklings. So he's reading, I believe, chapters of this to the Inklings. So that's some of what's going on. He begins around this time, I think, to run for professorships, and they're turned down. Also, some of the evil and the witchcraft, and even what we find in the first chapter. Charles Williams had written a book called Witchcraft, which is about the history of Satan. Charles Williams is now in Oxford as of 1940 and having a real profound influence on C.S. Lewis. And so Williams has come and he's joined the Inklings. And so that's some of what's going on.
That was helpful. I'm waiting for the big gaping miss here. Sound pretty similar to what I was saying.
Well, yeah, but I pulled that out of my head with no prep.
Just kidding, Andrew.
Sure as your head. I just want to fill in a few details that ChatGPT and Andrew missed.
That ChatGPT missed and Andrew left for you.
Oh, that was a good one, David.
The first thing that Lewis seems to have put to paper for Perelandra wasn't actually the text that we're about to read. It was actually a poem. Incredibly short, but I'm actually going to hold on to it until we actually get to the section where we talk about the floating islands, so we can read it. But yeah, this began life first of all as a poem. And Andrew, you mentioned Sister Penelope and her community, which I believe is actually still in existence. I think Malcolm Guite went and visited them a little while ago. But it's the community of St. Mary the Virgin, and they're just south of Oxford. And a little bit of context for that relationship. It was after Lewis wrote Out of the Silent Planet, so the first book in the series, he had received some fan mail from Sister Penelope, and they began writing back and forth to each other. And Lewis even gave a talk at the convent while he was working on Perelandra in 1942. And as you mentioned, Sister Penelope, she did a translation of On the Incarnation by St. Athanasius, and one of Lewis's essays appears at the front of that book. It's on reading old books. Well worth a read. But I did just want to highlight the dedication of Perelandra, because in the English it says to some ladies at Wantage, because it was a community of sisters in Wantage. But it was funny as I was putting that in this morning, I saw Andrew starting to write. I knew exactly where he was going. Andrew, how did "to some ladies at Wantage" get rendered in the Portuguese translation?
It was a very infelicitous translation. It was "to some wanton ladies," which is probably exactly the adjective you don't want to use for a group of nuns. A quick search shows that, yes, Wantage is still the community of St. Mary the Virgin. They're still there, and you can actually go and host your retreat there. So you can go and visit.
Well, now we want to turn our attention to some main themes. And I do like doing this in the beginning of this. I believe we did something like this with Out of the Silent Planet. It's actually quite helpful. We're going to do our best to not bring spoilers into it. But sometimes having, especially on these books that have a journey going on, kind of an understanding of what the arc is allows you to see how it's unfolding and play out.
Let me just mention that really quickly. For those of you who are reading the book for the first time, have at it, enjoy, and blessings on that work. For those of you who are rereading it, any reader will know that there is a certain pleasure in reading a book a second time. And Lewis, as a classicist, knows that most classical literature begins in media res, in the middle of matters. The Trojan cycle, the Iliad, starts in the 9th of 10 years of the Trojan War. Most people going to Athenian drama know the story of Oedipus, and so they know what's going to happen coming in. And Aristotle says that that's part of the draw of tragedies, that we know what's going to happen and we want to see how they get there. So if you're reading for the first time, great, have at. If you're reading for the second time, I'd encourage you to enjoy it and to see how Lewis is developing the end from the very beginning. Also, if you're rereading, read really carefully and read carefully those bits that you tend to skip over if you're anything like me.
If you are afraid of hearing even just some of this, or you disagree with having some of these main themes, skip forward probably about 3 to 5 minutes and just don't listen to this.
Although we will not be doing spoilers. We got chided a little bit for doing that a little bit too often with Out of the Silent Planet, so we're not going to do that. But as Matt says, if you do want to skip forward, there'll be a chapter marking in your podcast app for you to jump to the next section, which will be entitled Personal History.
I'll kick it off looking at what Andrew's are. I think his will fill in the gaps nicely in their a little bit more nuanced scholarly stuff, which is good. I'll do the peasant. I did not chat GPT this one, guys. These were just my. I have read the book. Is it James Como? I read his book, Mystical Perelandra.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So anyways, I would say one thing that really stuck out to me with this that I'm just looking forward to experiencing again a second time as I go through it is just leaning into mission. We saw that in the first one, Out of Silent Planet. We saw him, but with a much more raw, complete unknown of what that mission is as it started to get revealed. This time, there's obviously more of a trust and understanding, at least of the broader context, that there's these planets and that the different cosmic order, but there's still not an understanding of what his role is here. And so it's going to be really beautiful to see that play out. Probably not going to say any more there, even though I wrote more, because I don't want to give too much away. Obviously, there's going to be one on good versus evil. We've already hinted at that. The intellectual dialogues that happen, I think, are really interesting. The concept of innocence, unfallen creation, and not in the sense of this case of the battle between the fallen, not falling, but really just witnessing the beauty of unfallen creation, I think is inspiring. It's honestly really beautiful. We'll circle back to this later, but that was like my number one thing I remember from 10 years ago reading this. And then finally, I'll just leave this. This would get closer to a spoiler, so I'm not going to state any more other than just like action versus thought or dialogue or theology or stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just leave it at that. But that's a really fun thing too.
I think there's much of that, as is typical of Lewis. If he sounds a theme somewhere, he's going to sound it everywhere. The Barfield quote is great. What Lewis thought about anything is secretly present in what he said about everything. And so that's certainly true here. This book could, I jokingly call it Ungit, but this novel is effectively about love because it's about Aphrodite, but love in its unfallen state. And so what you see there certainly is the tension of love, which is a theme that Lewis is working himself towards. This is 42. He writes The Four Loves in 60. So he's on this arc. Another thing you see is Lewis beginning to really centralize women. So there aren't really women of note in Out of the Silent Planet, but this book is about a woman. Now it's two men fighting over her or fighting about her, not to give too much away, but Paul Ford talks about the trajectory of Lewis centralizing and empowering women, and it really starts here in a lot of ways. I think that you're right about that struggle. Lewis and Screwtape, right around the same time, talks about fantasy, intellect, and will. And we need to take things from the fantasy through our intellect and to the will. You also see in the first chapter a real struggle with emotion, which is something that Lewis thought about writing about in Fantasy, Intellect, Will, but crossed out. And so he's still grappling. Vision, like we see fulfilled, I think, in Lucy and then in Orwell, in its opposite. Vision really becomes crucial here, and how you see and how you think about things. And there's even a connection to the Blessed Virgin Mary, which Lewis doesn't really talk about. But at the very beginning, he's said, I'm interested in the Eva connection, the connection between Ave, between the Blessed Virgin, and between Eve. And of course, he's dedicating it to the community of St. Mary the Virgin. And he went to stay at Wantage with Sister Penelope and the sisters. And so this is maybe Lewis's most Marian book, and maybe about the redemption of Eve and Mary combined in this one woman. There's still loads and loads of wonderful stuff in here.
Well, I'll cap it off by just saying I think for me the theme of progression, the heavenly and hellish creatures, because we see in both our antagonist and our protagonist, we see that the trajectories that began in the previous book continue. But you also see that the role of both of them actually shifts as we move forward, and how each responds to what they are feeling called to do. The idea of their vocation here on Perelandra, we see a shift, a changing in level and activity of what they have done already. That now starts to escalate.
Let me just throw in a repeated warning for listeners. I think Out of the Silent Planet and Perelandra are a really lovely matched set, and featuring Ransom. And when I first read the Ransom Trilogy, and moved from Perelandra to That Hideous Strength, it was very jarring because the third book is not all that similar in style and focus, whatever. And so please enjoy this, but think of this as the Ransomiad. Like, these are the two Ransom books. And if you are racing ahead or revisiting your reading of the trilogy, I would make it a tetralogy, make it a foursome, and read a Charles Williams book after Perelandra and before That Hideous Strength. And I would recommend either The Place of the Lion or War in Heaven, but probably Place of the Lion. So this is the last of our really Ransom-centric books, and I'm looking forward.
But we'll be coming back to That Hideous Strength in season 10. So if you found it terrifying or confusing, we'll deal with that then.
Well, and this is a good transition, Andrews. You brought in like secondary literature. I'm interested in hearing each of your guys' personal history with Perelandra. When did you first read it? What did you think? Has your opinion changed? What other literature have you read about it directly, or that has honestly influenced your understanding of it, which you kind of already shared a little bit of that. Let's start with you, Andrew, the elderly first.
Age before beauty.
Yeah. Age and beauty together, and wisdom and holiness all together.
And humility.
And humility. I forgot about that because I assumed that everybody already knew. I can't remember when I first read it. Probably in the 90s. I really came to Lewis in, I think around 92 or so, 90, 91, something like that. And it was just delicious. Loved it and raced through it, really enjoyed it, was diving deeply into Lewis. I've reread it many, many times, talked about it in book groups. I even had a book group called the Silent Planet Society, which was fantastic. I haven't read a ton of the secondary literature. I met with Sanford Schwartz, who wrote a book about the Ransom books. I've got all of them. I've got David Downing's Planets in Peril, all the rest of it, Jared Lovedale's book. I think that Michael Ward is really excellent on this and kind of draws it all together. And we'll find out next week about who Notvilcius is and enjoy that. So long history with it, and it's absolutely one of my favorites.
I read it shortly after we completed the season where we went through Out of the Silent Planet, because I was now really curious as to what happened next. I probably read it a little quicker than I should have. I'm always saying slow down, but I didn't, so mea culpa. I enjoyed it. I could definitely see this was some of Lewis's best writing, and I probably shouldn't have just been gulping it down quite as quickly as I was.
Let me object to that, because I gulp it down as well. I think the gulping down kind of reading is a really good one, and it's a great pleasure that satisfies an immediate hunger, but then slowing down and reading it carefully, chewing it through. And I think that the culinary metaphor is a good one. I think that also brings a different kind of pleasure. And I think that Lewis would agree that there are different ways that we can read the same book. And I find that I do gulp it down. When I really need to gulp it down or slow down is at the end with the Blessed Be He's. And, I thought about even making a liturgy out of that. We've done that a couple of times in some of my groups. And so it's okay to gulp it down, but realize that there's so much more grist for the mill. There's so much more to chew on when you read it slowly. So read it however you like, but then go back and read it the other way too.
Yeah. And as for secondary literature, I think most of the titles have been mentioned. Also Diana Gleyer's book, the Deep Heaven book. I've read those. I went looking again for new books when we were beginning this season. And the only real one I found was Mystical Perelandra. And I'd already interviewed James several seasons ago when it actually just first came out. He'll be coming back on the show to talk about that in detail. But I will end just by saying that it was actually when I did the interview about Perelandra the opera, that was actually what gave the book a very different, a very new texture to me as I went to experience it through another medium. And seeing someone else's interpretation of that work made me look at it with slightly different eyes.
There's another book of collection of essays, right? I'm trying to pull it up.
Compass for Deep Heaven was Diana Gleyer's.
Right.
That was one she edited.
Judith Wolfe did a volume of criticism, right?
Don't know if it was a volume, but she's certainly done work on that. She was one of the scholars I had on for the Perelandra opera.
Yes. Here it is. It's C.S. Lewis's Perelandra, Reshaping the Image of the Cosmos. And it's edited by Judith and Brendan Wolfe, who I met one time in Oxford. And it's a collection of essays, including, ooh, wow, fantastic, I need this. Paul Fiddes, who wrote the book on Charles Williams, a systematic theology professor at Oxford, Baptist guy. Monica Hilder, who's done great work on Lewis's women. Sanford Schwartz, who wrote a book on the trilogy. Michael Ward. And Walter Hooper's reminiscences about his conversations with Lewis about, okay, yeah, now I need to get this. So, doesn't Pints need to send us a beginning of the season gift? So I'll add that to my cart. Lovely stuff.
How about you, Matt?
Yeah, for myself, so I'd read it in college, part of the C.S. Lewis course. And that brings me back. That would have been 2012, 2013 timeframe. Obviously, that was pretty far back, but my memory very distinctly was at least finding it beautiful. I remember just being immersed in the beauty of the experiential that Lewis had really created of this unfallen world. And then I remember very distinctly the dialogue between Ransom, the good and the evil conversations. And so those two really stuck out to me. And obviously in Scripture, the fall happens so quick. There's not a lot of conversation around it, that it was really interesting to hear it sort of unpacked. Yeah. And then I've also, I read both Christiana Hale's book and A Compass for Deep Heaven. And then I just did James Como. So I'm excited for the season because I'm probably the most prepared from a scholarly perspective. I want to clarify. I'm always prepared from the personal reading it, diving in, and just my own personal experience with the book. But it's another thing too, the scholarly. And so I'm excited with this one.
Yeah.
What might be kind of our next section here, hopes for this season, to have a more immersive experience again, now that I've read this before, and I've now read it twice. This will be my third time. I'm very just excited to just enjoy it, to take it in, to receive it. And this is, having read it and then now rereading it makes it a little bit less pressure when you're going through it chapter by chapter to be like, oh my goodness, I'm very much looking forward to this. What about you, Andrew?
Lewis calls this one of his favorite books. He talks about making the cathedral of his books, and Perelandra Until We Have Faces are very near the top. Obvious similarities notwithstanding, I find that people either really love it or they don't like it all that well. It's kind of rhapsodic. It's kind of sweeping. And I love that David's going to bring in the opera because it is kind of operatic in its setting. I'm looking forward to diving into any season, for pity's sake. Hanging out with you, my good friends, is always the top of my list. But then to really dig into, this is kind of the heart of Lewis, because the 40s are where he does, I think, most of his best writing. And he's really hitting the ground. I look forward to hearing what you guys say, how you might anticipate the Great Divorce in Perelandra, because that comes 4 years later. I'm really looking forward to hearing what our listeners have to say. Really jealous of those who are reading it for the first time, and really eager to join those who are rereading it again along with us. And Matt, I'm impressed. 3 times reading the same book by C.S. Lewis. My esteem has raised.
I was discussing with Mary Margaret. I was like, after chatting with Andrew about what we really should pay attention to, I want to go back through Till We Have Faces. This is my 3rd time. I've been told it gets better and better. And so I really want to read it with the knowledge equipped that you help us with, and then go use our season episodes, because that's kind of one where when you're recording it, we kind of popcorned in and out, I think, if I recall correctly, maybe.
Yeah, I was there 3 times.
Yeah, and so I'm looking forward to that. So that'll be my second Lewis book 3 times.
I just wish I had been on for the whole season Until We Have Faces, but boy, that was the start of a fantastic friendship, and I'm grateful for the chance to jump in.
No, I think it was better the way it was. It's just like just filter you down to punctuated points in the season. It's actually rather like Till We Have Faces in terms of we have to be prepared for the full force of all of the love that Andrew has for Till We Have Faces. It's not something that you can just be exposed to.
That's true.
It's like the Indiana Jones movie where they find the Ark of the Covenant to take the lid off and everyone's faces start melting. That's what I would have been like if we just jumped straight into it. At least at this point, everyone's now prepared and acclimatized.
I'll try not to melt any faces.
So, by the way, I vote for, in the future, because I forgot that Andrew was only sporadically on, a Till We Have Faces month That is just Andrew. So, perhaps ahead of time, but does 4-part series Until We Have Faces, your wisdom, your knowledge, break it down, convince the world of its beauty and incredible grandeur.
Those would be long episodes. We would have to give him a time limit.
Actually, I'd be open to doing that, but I want that to be moderated. And, I think that should be a great guest star episode or something. And all the joking aside, considering whether and why it is Lewis's best book.
How about some concluding thoughts before we go, guys? I got nothing.
Well, I was just going to say a couple of things. One was that I'd really like to incorporate listener feedback as we go through. So we'll probably have a couple of points through the season where we'll share some of the things that people have been have written to us and told us about as they've read along with us. I'd really like to include that at a couple of points. Also, an announcement about some various giveaways that we're going to be doing this season. Firstly, I've threatened to do this for a long time, but it is actually now going to happen this season. Each month with our newsletter, I'm going to be giving away one of the collection of Lewis books that we had to give away for the C.S. Lewis Reading Day. So if you are subscribed, you are all now automatically entered into that drawing.
And if you're a Patreon supporter and you're coincidentally not subscribed, that's okay. You'll also be in there because Patreon supporters should be in there too.
Oh, yes. I've added them automatically.
Beautiful.
And the other thing is also I wanted to do a few more giveaways. And one of the things I'm thinking about doing is giving away a few memberships to the New York C.S. Lewis Society. So stay tuned for the rest of this season if you want some more free stuff.
It's going to be a great season, and I'm looking forward to hanging out with my friends. That's how Kristen and I met. During a vacation, what I like to do is share a good meal or a good drink and talk about Lewis with people who are sympathetic. And it feels like that to me. It feels like an indulgence of great friendship as we travel with Ransom to Unget, to Venus, to Perelandra, and see what happens there.
And I would also add there might be some effects of time dilation over the next few episodes, because currently Andrew and I are talking to a single man in Matt, but by the time this gets published, he's going to be married.
Yeah. Well, and also during the course of this season, there is some chance that I may be changing jobs, maybe even moving house. My residency program is 3 years, and I've just gone past my second year at Church of the Messiah, having a wonderful time still learning all kinds of things, but it is designed to be no longer than a 3-year program. And so at some point during the season, we may find me in a new location and with some new perspectives and job responsibilities and all the rest.
How about Alexandria, Virginia?
Well, if you can give us weekly flights to Sarasota, we'd be happy to do that. We're leaving it in the hands of Malaldil, and we will accept whatever wave he sends towards us, as Tenedril would say.
And given all of this upcoming change, I may have to jump in as well and have another kid. We'll see.
Wow. Okay. Teaser.
Well, I hear the call for final drinks, so thank you to our intern Julia and our sound engineers Taylor and Sarah. Thanks to our Patreon supporters, particularly our top tier ones: Becca, Kevin, Mary Margaret, Aldo, Alex, James, Matt, Erica, Joelle, Amanda, Thomas, Bud 1, Bud 2, Shane, Kay, Paul, Gary, Stephen, Kelly, Chris, John, James, Kate, Peter, David, Angela, and Rowdy. And of course, to all of you listening.
Absolutely.
So please join us again next time,
when we'll continue going further up
and further in.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.